Hi, and thank you so much for joining. We are having a conversation about a topic that's actually incredibly dear to us, which is the carbon footprint of contemporary art. It's trying to figure out what is the cost of all the things that we do, including attending Art Basel. For this, we have here Lucia Pietroiusti, who is the curator of the General Ecology Department at Serpentine Galleries. Catherine Bottrill, arriving any second, the head of the Creative Green Program, Julie's Bicycle in London. Andreas Stramentov, founder and CEO of Rockbox, also London. And moderating, we have Chris Hampton, who is a freelance journalist based in Toronto. And I think we can start the conversation while Julie arrives. Sure.
So good afternoon, good evening, Art Basel. Thank you for attending this session of conversations on the carbon footprint of contemporary art. My name is Chris Hampton, and as you just heard, I'm an arts journalist. I'm based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and I will moderate our chat today. To my left, we'll do a quick introduction again. We have Lucia Pietroiusti, who is curator of general ecology at Serpentine Galleries, as well as curator of the Golden Lion winning Lithuanian Pavilion in Venice. To her left, we have Andrew Stramentov, who is founder and managing director of Rockbox. I thought we could begin by talking a bit about our work. I should say this is a topic that I come to relatively recently. For an issue themed around climate, the magazine Canadian Art asked me to investigate what Canadian cultural institutions are doing and what they are not doing when it comes to environmental sustainability. This is the first time I'd thought with much concentration on the subject. I will tell you, startled by the lack of information that I found, both on the level of institutions individually, as well as more broadly as a sector. I was doubly startled by the unwillingness of some institutions to discuss their operational habits and practices. Oh, we have Catherine. Catherine has joined us, everyone. So again, this is Catherine Bottrill. She's head of Creative Green Program at Julie's Bicycle. Yes, thank you for joining us. So yes, I was totally startled by this unwillingness to discuss their operational habits and practices. And then by contrast, I was greatly heartened by the few institutions who were willing to share that data, some I'm sure doing that publicly for the very first time. So at the heart of that reporting mission, and I think at the heart of our talk here today, there's this question that I found, and it goes something like, what is art? You know, this field or this endeavor that reflects on the world and purports to care deeply about the world. What is art doing, practically speaking, to care for the world? And what is art doing that actually harms the world? So that's me. And let's get to know our panelists a little more. To introduce yourselves better, maybe you can tell us a bit about your work as it relates to art and the environment. We'll begin to my left with Lucia, please.
Hi. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, Julieta, for the invitation, and Annelie and everyone at Art Basel for just making it so smooth and easy to be here. So you've kind of said everything, except maybe I should tell you a little bit more about what general ecology is at the Serpentine. And maybe for those of us, for those of you who haven't seen it, I can tell you a little bit about what the Lithuanian Pavilion is being and how it intersects with questions around the environment. So I am emerged in all of this in 35 seconds. So I emerge out of live programs and performance and sort of time-based curating, not exhibitions curating, or rather that's an older history. And so General Ecology is a project that I worked on for about a year in a kind of latent stage. It wasn't a kind of official project of the Serpentine. It didn't quite exist, but we started to make live programs, somehow funnel the energies and budgets of the live programs to start to create some kind of a longer-term, ongoing research project and discussion and collaborative, let's say, platform around a very wide notion of ecology, so that's why it's called General. But the idea was to do that with the aim of somehow infecting the entire institution's outputs with the ecological as a concern, and to do so through, therefore, methods that start with a live, because you can program live things very quickly. You can decide in 3 months I'm going to do something about interspecies communication. But to also try and sort of slowly go deeper into the institution, following its different temporalities. So you can turn around the live programs very fast. You can change the kind of carbon footprint of the organization much slower. And the exhibitions and publications and radio and all the rest of the things that we do are kind of in between. So that was the aim of the project. And the idea was to use the very methodologies that are borrowed from images and methodologies and behaviors and ideas that exist in the environment, such as symbiosis, cooperation, co-evolution as opposed to competition, to model our methodologies on those very ideas. I think that it's very important what image you have in your head towards the kind of end result of your work. So one of the ways in which we've also done that is to do something that I always call make the work do the work, which is how to catalyze art, particularly art that has a profound effect on its audiences. And this is where we get to what I feel the Lithuanian Pavilion maybe did in some part, or at least that's that's what I sort of saw it do, which is how to catalyze that kind of energy that happens in the moment of big impact towards deeper and more infrastructural and more kind of embedded things. I won't tell you about them all now because I want to hear. You. But yeah, so that's my job.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Lucia. Andrew, if you could tell us a little bit about Rockbox, please.
Hello. Rockbox. Rockbox is a company that was co-founded by myself and some like-minded individuals who had all been working in the art world for quite a long time. It was started about 4 or 5 years ago, and it was formed firstly because we'd been working in exhibitions and in art fairs and auctions, and we had a couple of instances where, despite everyone's best intentions, lots of hard work, lots of money being spent, things went wrong badly with irreplaceable artworks. And there's that feeling that when something like that happens, which is just the most dreadful thing in the world. And secondly, having worked in all these different places, I've worked at the Basel Art Fair 6 times for a gallery, we're kind of astonished by the sheer scale of the waste that's produced. And we set about, so Rockbox is a research and development company. And so what we do is we design and develop products and technologies to protect artwork better and in a more sustainable way for the environment. So that's what we've done. We've made a product, finally. It's taken a lot longer than we'd first hoped, but it's targeted at things like art fairs. So it is a really robust, really multiple reuse case for 2-dimensional artworks. So hopefully we can start tackling that bit where people are just throwing away all these single-use items that the world's talking about so much. And that is Rockbox.
Thank you, Andrew. And Catherine, can you tell us a little bit about your work with Julie's Bicycle, please?
Yep. Julie's Bicycle is a charity, and we're based in the UK. And we formed now over 12 years ago in response to say that the creative industries is actually like any industries and needing to think about how it responds to climate change and the ecological emergency. And our founder, Alison Tickell, was working a lot initially in the music industry and seeing the artists and people within the business wanting to platform the issue of climate change, and it sort of having some success, being really ad hoc, not joined up. And so she felt that in collaboration as an industry needed to work together through the full supply chain, and very much as Lucia said, looking at the infrastructure and how does change sort of this system really work. And so we have now been working for 12 years, and we work across all forms of art. Had the joy to work a lot with the visual arts and would love to work more with the visual arts, because it's seen as both the creative industries having this immense capacity to power action on climate change. Climate change is not just an economic, technological issue. It's really around culture and cultural shifts, identity, values, and the arts have a really important place to be at the table on this issue. And so we work in sort of with these organizations to really help them fully understand the issue so that they can have the confidence and the capacity to really enliven and fully engage with the debate. And so it's very much thinking about both the nuts and bolts, but also the inspiration. So we have these two missions around our work. One is the industry powering action on climate change through its nuts and bolts, but then the second part is really about the amplification of the voice and really thinking about what that looks like. And as both said, it's about the innovations, thinking about new design, thinking about principles that one can draw on, like ecological principles of collaboration, cooperation, and create new ways of working that really can help us imagine what this sustainable futures work is. And then for myself personally, I come from a sustainability background and very much kind of rooted in data and how to really enliven that data and translate it to help anybody within their role think about what actions they might take. So as we kind of explore the conversation, it'd be great to draw out some examples that we've been involved in doing.
Thank you very much. So I think very related to what you just said, I was going to start with something that's kind of big and ideological, and it's why does art, its organizations, its institutions, various other participants have a responsibility, or perhaps you might see it as a special opportunity to address climate change? I'll toss it up to anybody, but Catherine, do you want to speak about that?
Yeah, I'd be really happy, because I did think about this this case, what can the arts and creativity do in this space? And at Julie's Bicycle, we've thought around these 7 really exciting trends of how the creative community is really engaging on this issue. And I thought it'd be nice just to kind of paint those 7 trends out to you, because I think you might, in your different roles and hats, think about where would you fit in thinking about this climate movement. So the creative climate movement first has very much the work, the creative work, pieces and artists, and I think we're just seeing this like explosion going on at the moment from actual makers thinking about sustainability and climate in their actual practice. And then the second trend that we have is all around activism. So sometimes institutions, organizations, artists want to really take an activist place in this. And I think the Extinction Rebellion movement that's been growing is a really example of an activism. And I've just seen that, protests sort of looking at how institutions get their funding and fossil fuel sponsorship, investment, and those kind of tensions there. But you can see all sorts of conversation happening around the sources of funding that support that work, and I would say there's this great growing trend around activism. And then the third is the example that Chris said, is really this organizational leadership. If you're not doing it in and of yourselves, then it's going to be really hard. You're going to stumble around in this issue, and what we're seeing is some fantastic organizational leadership, right through from the governance, thinking about trustees, to policies, strategies, appointment of roles. This morning, for a major arts institution, I just helped them think about that business case of why you'd bring on someone in-house to really work on this issue, but you're seeing lots of great examples of that. And then the fourth is around design and innovation, and thinking that actually as a creative community, it's our kind of bread and butter to think of new ways of working, designing new materials, new business models. Creativity has always been quite disruptive and pioneering, and you're seeing some great examples of new ways of doing that in the sustainability and creative context, and there's lots of examples. We have if you go onto our website, the 7 trends, and there's a global map where you can see that. And then the 5th is one that I really love, and it is about cooperation. And it's a trend about, as a single player, as a single institution, it's so difficult to do this stuff, but in a kind of collective, you can really empower a lot. And there's some wonderful collaborations. For example, there's a group called Manchester Art Sustainability Team, which is everything from the BBC to the Jewish Museum working together at a city scale, thinking as cultural organizations, what could they do? And they've now, in that example, become really core in supporting Manchester in their net zero carbon strategy, which is really exciting place cultural organizations go. And then the last 2 trends, just to give you a taster, is about pathfinders. So Julie's Bicycle, we place ourselves there, and you need these catalysts, these prompters of the conversation. And there's groups like Julie's Bicycle, Invisible Dust is one that you might know, but just help to convene and create a space for the conversation. And then the last trend, which is a really critical foundational one, and Chris might ask some questions about that further, but it's around policy. And there's some great things that as light touch policy instruments that can create the shifts. And probably the biggest example we have in the UK is the Arts Council England making it a requirement of all regularly funded organizations to have a policy, a carbon footprint, and an action plan. And it's been now in its 7th year as a program, and I would say it's been really transformational in how a sector might start to think about this. So if you, probably everybody in the room can think of examples across all those 7 trends, but I think it's, when you bring those all together, you get this creative movement powering action.
Lucia, do you maybe have anything to add about why art ought to care about the environment?
I mean, it ought to care about the environment because it ought to care about the environment. But I think I'm going to go even maybe more abstract than, I mean, you called the question ideological. I find it a very practical, pragmatic question, and I'm so appreciative of the kind of almost 7 steps to kind of from idea to infrastructure, from curatorial to policy, whatever you might think of it in. Personally, I'm quite sort of conflicted in the moment at which we think about us as an individual being with a relatively limited cognitive capacity vis-a-vis something so vast and distributed as the climate crisis. In a situation also in which the climate crisis is incredibly unevenly distributed, so also, here talking about the effects of climate devastation, which are happening entirely elsewhere. And in a situation in which a lot of the times, and what I really love about Julie's Bicycle is that it has this kind of very positive, very encouraging message, but a lot of the times you end up in this loop of, yes, but you have this footprint. We're all implicated, we all have this footprint. So how do we embed within ourselves a notion of ecological selfhood? And my curatorial work hinges on this question of how to embed an ecological sense of self, which goes as...
Can you clarify what does it mean by an ecological sense of self?
I'm going to try. It goes as it can go quite widely. So the first thing is, how do you develop a relationship with your own plastic object that's right in front of you, where you have an effective feeling that you have to deal with, and that the next time you will not pick it up or whatever, as opposed to I'm supposed to not do it, but if nobody looks at me, I might. Because there's a different, we relate to obligations, tasks, roles, and affect in very different ways. Then there's the super abstract stuff, which I find to be completely fascinating and completely essential. We were talking about it this morning with Kavani, which is there is a notion that in order to become an individual, it's a very 20th century kind of Western, global Northwestern notion, that in order to become a kind of individual, you have to emerge as a selfhood out of some kind of a soup that is, whether it's the subconscious, your parents, your social circumstance, like whatever. And that once you emerge as this self, there's like the self is this individual notion, which is the same, it sort of self-justifies with the idea of, say, evolution as being inherently competitive. And it justifies all kinds of social structures and economic systems and all of that create this sense of like, well, it's in nature, evolution is competition, it's in nature, and therefore it's everywhere else. If you start to think, and this is like, you don't need an enormous amount, I'm an amateur at this, but if you start to think about the fact that our moods, like we can be depressed because our gut bacteria are not doing well. And equally, we think that our sort of the boundaries of our skin are the kind of the end of ourselves. We exchange materials with the atmosphere on a constant and regular basis. We emerge out of compost, and when we die, a tree is going to eat us. That's the kind of thing that I'm really interested in drawing out of the programs that we do, so that when you do encounter that bottle, it's all of these layers, including this like very gutty, fleshy, effective one, are kind of activated. And the question of how or whether or can art be a factor of this, well, it has less of an obligation to take you each step of the way like the scientific process does, right? So the scientific process, plus many times the sciences kind of specialize into these kinds of niches, which faced with this giant thing which affects every form of different way of knowing on the planet, how do you know, I mean, sometimes I invite microbiologists and oceanographers to the same event, and you need a kind of bizarre interspecies translation to even get past those. So you're really sort of in the necessity of getting out of these kinds of niches. And art has this phenomenal capacity, art at its best, has this phenomenal capacity to jump through the hoops and give you a kind of, throw you an intuitive something without necessarily needing to bind itself by certain things. So that's, anyway, long story short. Long story long.
I mean, thinking about our relationship with that plastic bottle, as you said, no. In terms of our carbon footprint, what art world activities are the most damaging? What practices make the art industry an especially bad offender, would you say? I'll toss that out to whomever would like to take it.
Well, I mean, the obvious one, the big one, is always the movement of people. It's either the movement of the professionals that are creating and enabling the sort of creating the work, but then also the visitors and the audience. And I think this is probably one of the toughest ones to wrestle with, and there's no easy answers. There's no silver bullet to address this. And it is, and especially the power of kind of cultural connection and dialogue. It's important that we get into the room together and we get to know each other, both when you're developing a project, but also when you're trying to connect, as an artist and show your work. So there is, so I would say it's a difficult one, but there's lots of stuff that you can do around looking at your travel. So we do a lot of work thinking on the immediate, understanding when you're creating a piece of work. Like we did a piece of work with Oliver Eliasson. He had a piece of work called Ice Watch that was moving about 30 icebergs from Greenland to sort of melt in front of Tate Modern just in December at the same time as the climate talk. So it was really kind of provocative. It's a very kind of guttural moment to kind of tactily relate to climate change. But also that piece had a lot of movement of a big object and also a whole bunch of people that made that all happen. But the thing that we took, and you can go and see the carbon footprint of Ice Watch to understand what was the material impact of putting on that exhibition. But you can also see that if you start the conversation way at the beginning when you're developing a piece of project and a work, one with the team and the institution that you want to display it, the time of year you want to display it, how it fits in with other things in the programs and other work that you're doing. There's all sorts of, at a basic level, efficiencies that can be derived. And for example, I worked with a big music company and they reduced their air travel by 20% just by kind of thinking a bit more about it, but you would not say that business has in any way suffered any hardship from their business needs, their commercial needs. So I think at one level, there's this kind of efficiency and pragmatism. But then I think, as Lucia is saying, there are some more profound questions, which I would say we as the art world need to wrestle with. You know, will our movement of people look like this in 20 years' time or 30 years' time? Can this climate ecological emergency allow us just to continue a business as usual? And I think there's some bigger questions for us to think about what that might look like.
Catherine, you said there that circulation was one of the biggest issues. How bad is a plane ride?
How bad
is a plane ride?
So a plane ride, let's see if I can. So a trip to New York from Europe is probably the equivalent of at least half your tons of carbon emissions for that year. So right in one sort of 6-hour journey, you've done the equivalent of what another person in your town would have taken them half the year to burn. So that's the kind of math that you're having to wrestle with.
Right. I'll spare the David Wallace Wells impression, but isn't there a stat that something like 1 metric ton of carbon emitted, that is a round-trip flight from New York to London, let's say, will melt something like 3 square meters of Arctic sea ice directly?
There's all sorts of these, and that is probably about right. You know, the rapid, the relationship between the emissions from a flight to the Greenland ice sheet. I mean, one thing I think is interesting, I do think air travel is one that we all have to kind of grasp and wrestle with. But I would also say the other big area, apart from movement, which is a more kind of tangible, easier to win, is buildings. So buildings globally represent about 40% of global emissions. And we have all the technologies, we have all the infrastructure. They're kind of easy. They don't move on us. So when I think on where might you start, definitely greening your buildings, and it enables a kind of tangible relationship. And then you look at how you create projects and how you work, and that's the thing that probably tackles the air travel.
Right. When you're talking about greening your buildings, what sorts of actions are you talking about?
For buildings?
Yeah.
So one thing it's with buildings is measurement. It is a really useful to understand where your energy use in your buildings goes. You know, how much energy is used for your lighting, with your heating. And so there's all sorts of, and what's been exciting is before, if any of you know in your homes where your energy meters tend to be in a very difficult cupboard that you cannot get to, and when you get to it, you still can't really easily read the number on it. and that gets amplified into bigger buildings. Like probably this building has a big meter room, but what's been exciting, and this is where technology can be quite powerful, is kind of the automatic collection of data. And that data is now getting sent up into the cloud. And now instead of what I used to see as people spending a lot of time collecting the data, and now the exciting things is people are getting to interpret the data and make decisions about how to make investments into their buildings. And I also think that lots of buildings, even before you put any new kit in or think, oh my gosh, we've got to replace the heating system, lots in buildings are all about kind of behavior practices, understanding, you know, I don't know if any of you work in like an open plan office space, and there will be someone who says, oh, I'm really chilly, or, oh, I'm really hot. And it's always, your facilities manager is always dealing with the complaints, you know, of people's comfort levels. But I've worked with lots of organizations that just move the people that get hot really easily. They go to one part of the open plan space, and the people that get really cold or something and need heating on the other side. So I think buildings are interesting because they've got like this fabric, but they've got the people inside, and normally you can make some really nice savings, like 30% savings, just by working better with the people inside the buildings.
Right, and sorry to pick on you, Catherine, but I wanted to drag back to something you said earlier. You said that you'd worked with some music enterprises. How is visual arts doing as a subsector compared to other, art sectors that you work with?
I think it's interesting to me, and was so wonderful to get invited to Art Basel this year, and I'm sure everybody in the panel sees this. It kind of goes in ebbs and flows, and sort of in the early days of Julie's Bicycle, I would say the visual arts were very kind of knocking on our door, saying, "Hey, help! We're kind of grappling with this," and then it got quiet again, and that might be sort of related to the financial crash, and climate change went off the boiler a little bit. But then I really feel in the last 2 years there's this kind of emergence coming, and also this sense that, one, you're seeing other parts of the industry. So I would say music has done, especially in the UK, has done a lot, and you're seeing especially the festivals really tackling their kind of infrastructure. And then, interestingly, theatre has also done lots, and I think there's some nice parallels between the performing arts and the visual arts, because there is this kind of making work, moving work around. And we've been doing some nice projects looking at theatre, looking at production and materials that are going in, where the provenance of those materials are. And I think it throws up some similar questions. And so I'm feeling that the visual arts are wanting to get back in this and wanting to do more. And I think it's also because the community of artists are more and more creating work about this and making the asks of the institutions they work with.
Right. So the art sector is comprised of, many different role players who add differently to its carbon footprint. And I mean, we can't take right now to visit every station artist through auction house, but we can talk about a few key players, I think. So if you were to think about it, what can, for instance, a collector do when it comes to their impact on the environment? What should they be especially aware of? Maybe this is something, Andrew, you could speak about this. I think you have significant experience here.
I think the most important thing that needs to happen at the moment is that people need to start asking questions, because we've been very accepting that art travels around and it can get there in 24 hours notice, and we can package it up and we can send it. And I think that the collectors can turn around and start speaking to the shipping companies, of which there are quite a few forward-thinking shipping companies who have, bought our Rockboxes, reusable products. They have invested in electric vehicles for delivering in cities. They are looking at, bioplastics that are more, and ask them what is the more responsible way for me to move my stuff about. Because unless they're asking, there's very little imperative for people to change. So, I mean, your question earlier about what makes the art world so special place to sort of be asking this question. Mm-hmm. The art world's full of really curious people who challenge the status quo. Art does that. Art, you go around, you see some things, and it makes you question, and it's difficult, and we're populated by kind of forward-thinking individuals. So it kind of should start here with collectors, with galleries, with, places like this.
Right. I would suppose circulation movement is, again, a problem when you're thinking of collectors. What about carbon offsets? Do they work? Is that any sort of a solution?
I think they have a role to play. And again, I feel like carbon offsets, Chris was asking me about carbon offsets in the context of this panel. And I feel like they're coming back up the agenda again. Carbon offset, especially what's called the voluntary market. So you had governments, they have requirements to reduce their emissions, and they create credits of tons of carbon. And then what you had is people that weren't like a business or something that wanted to do these projects, and you saw all these people were developing these projects, and typically they might be in the developing countries, and they might be anything from a nice lighting project, a clean cook stove project, a forestry project, And the most important things around these offsets is really making sure, that you're buying from a really credible source, because there can be lots of charlatans in this space. And it can be, in a far off place that you can't go easily and visit that project. So can you really trust the credibility of those? But has been really good, there is more, and it's called gold standard. So if you are thinking of doing carbon offsetting, is to look for gold standard projects. And then, but I'm working with a large arts institution in London, and they thought their new chief exec wanted to deal with that business travel and said, let's offset the business travel. But these institutions still had a lot of work to do to join the dots, align with the departments and stuff. So just sort of buying some credits off in a far-flung place I recommended to them was not a great place to start. And what they needed to do was more internal work. So we've developed for them an inset scheme. And so the important criteria of an inset scheme is, so what they're doing is they put a price of carbon, it's about £10,000 is going to be the pot. And the staff are going to be able to pitch in and access that money. But the two things that have to be, they have to be additional, and it has to be additional to what the institution would have done otherwise. So if it was already going to do some nice signage or something, that won't count. So it has to be a stretch. And then I said, given the nature of the institution that I'm talking about, innovation is really important, and design. And therefore, you should connect this to your core missions and values and give your staff an opportunity to apply what they're doing in all their other work, but around the environment, get some money to do it. And then, and I think down the road, once they're further along, offsetting externally might make sense. But there's so many ways you can think about these projects.
But am I also correct in thinking, and it's a question, that a lot of offsetting initiatives actually end up planting monocultures, which in some way is not, it helps with oxygen, but not with biodiversity or species extinction or nothing.
Yeah. And there can be this, and that's kind of doing some research on who you're buying from to make sure that it's a project that you really feel is supportive. But the interesting thing is that, in the UK today, they've just announced a commitment, the government, to go to net zero carbon. We already had in law to go 80% reduction by 2050. And now the government's going to go that extra little step. An important part of that is going to be what's called carbon capture, and tree planting is part of one of those solutions. And I think it's a really interesting one of the sweets in the bag for carbon storage. So I think good forestry projects can be great.
And because offsets are something that individuals can go and purchase, what does an offset cost? If I wanted to offset my flight here, my round trip at 2 tons of carbon, what would it cost me?
It can range, again, looking for quality. So you can go for $5 for a ton of carbon. So that means that you can fly, that trip to New York, which is 4 tons, you could offset it for $20. And I think everybody in this room would say, I can't even buy a dinner with $20. Can I really save the planet with $20? So there are groups, and you can think more, and I would say probably at least, what they say is the true cost of carbon is you're looking more at $100. So that means that true cost of that flight to New York is maybe more like $400. And now I can think, actually, $400 is a weekend break. That's starting to be a little bit more of a serious money. So the other thing which I think is interesting is to put find out what your carbon footprint is and put a working carbon price on it. And then again, use that to inform your business decision-making and your choices that you're going to make.
Right. Thinking of some other role players in the space, what can museums and galleries do to reduce their footprint? If anybody has any thoughts about that. Anyone?
I do have an answer.
Okay. Yes. Go. Have it, Catherine.
I think probably a very straightforward one for every museum and everybody at home to do is to buy green energy. You know, it's saying to the supply chain, it also will drive investment in renewables. Renewable energy and having green electricity is part of the climate solution, and all of us need to invest in that. And it's really interesting, again, you know, it can be, you know, you can get really competitive prices in the UK of what the price per kilowatt hour is between a green and a regular, and like they call it brown energy. And I just think, yes, it might be 5% better, but surely, probably the cost of your energy bill, if you're a gallery or a museum, an office, is a fraction of your overall running costs. And I think the climate emergency can probably warrant that expenditure for green energy.
I'd agree. I think the systems that are in place currently for galleries and museums that are kind of accepted and quite set in stone, I think we should be looking at challenging quite a lot of those. So whether it's whether all the galleries need to, you know, be kept at these kind of extreme museum temperatures, which, you know, require a lot of energy. Does this show really need it? I know, you know, it's on all year round, but does this show need it? And you know, some of the museums, they only ever use their cases once, and then they trash them. And we sort of said, why? You know, because they're still kind of good. And they said, well, actually, it's the cost of storing them, which is kind of really expensive. And you sort of sit there going, you know, maybe if we could quantify that cost, or you could be credited with saving that thing, that would be a really good thing. It might start to change behavior. But I think we have to look at how we're doing things generally and challenge them.
And if I may add the rather abstract perspective of the curatorial once again, I think there was something that you said about artworks that are starting to kind of really address this, and I think it's really a good thing when the pressure begins from a kind of set of research and concerns and ideas that artists may have that have influenced in the work, and then that work gets presented, that presentation gains a certain kind of momentum. Therefore, those issues then have a megaphone. I mean, I'm kind of describing what's happening in Venice at the moment. All of a sudden, that conversation is sort of at the top of the agenda, and you've kind of, in a way, put pressure on your own self by presenting a work about that. Put pressure on your own self, which I think is a very good thing to do as an organization, to sort of embed those things which exist on the discursive into the fabric of the ways in which you're doing the things. So a lot of the times the framing of this conversation is, we all talk about the environment, but are we actually doing it? And my position is always firmly, the more we talk about it, the more internal pressure there exists to embed those principles. Things have different temporalities. The greening of an institution or a building is going to take longer than a curatorial decision. Having said this, it's an emergency. So how do you set yourself how do you participate as the discursive kind of crust of that? We, at the Serpentine, I mean, I told you about infecting everything that we do with ecology, had to reckon with what to do for next year, which is our 50th anniversary. And I kind of hinted at this when we spoke. And rather than looking back at, say, 50 years of great something, or looking forward to a future that we can't definitely for sure say that it's definitely there for everyone, definitely there at all, and definitely there for everyone of all species on the planet, are looking at ecology for the entire year. We're dedicating the year to the ecological in various different ways. And what does that mean? That all of a sudden we have 6 months to get really on board with the way that we ourselves use energy. And, you know, so that's internal pressure. We feel that internal pressure. We're all up for it. But it comes from a kind of curatorial decision, which I find so fascinating.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and I think that's the really important, actually, apart what can galleries and museums, and I think it's about sharing the journey. That sometimes what we say is it can be this idea of green hush, where organizations and individuals don't actually want to talk about what they're doing until it's all, the ducks are all really nicely lined up. And it could take 5 years of kind of a lot of inward thinking and introspection, whereas actually what you want to say is, because people are worried that they might have made the wrong decision, and I think carbon offsetting is the example, or making sure that you buy from a credible, even green electricity supplier. So people then get really nervous. But I think if you have built a relationship with your audiences and visitors, it can be a really enlivened way to share that journey with them. And I think it's really crucial. And I think the arts as being quite kind of beacon institutions within a city and a identity, it can really help your audiences that are wrestling with those same questions in their lives. The nice example I also have is, if anybody saw it, Fashion from Nature at the V&A was a really bold, it was the first time on such a big scale they had programmed so explicitly in their programming something around sustainability. And Edwina Herman, who was the head curator, when she first conceived of it, she started it in 2014, planning that, and she thought, it was going to be a really nice kind of nature exhibition. But then as she thought about fashion, she realized that fashion has been an incredibly exploitative endeavor and it kind of unlocked a whole different ideas, and she had a residency at the Natural History Museum, but it also prompted so many questions internally within the V&A, from everything from the procurement of the catalogue to the exhibition design and lighting. And now it's like, how can we ensure that bold exhibition isn't a one-off, but we bring it into every part of every new exhibition? And it doesn't happen overnight. But
I've been signaled to start the question and answer period, but I'm going to take 5 more minutes because I think it would be negligent if we didn't take the opportunity on this stage to also ask the question, what can an art fair do better? What could we do better here?
I think art fairs such as this are kind of amazing because you're bringing, obviously, everyone together. And this art fair, make no mistake, is not environmentally friendly, but they're giving a platform for us to have a discussion about how we might improve this. And we're having this discussion, and that's great. And it's a sort of an opportunity for us to keep on these conversations. I started a company 4 years ago. It took ages to make a product that is going to have a relative dent in the carbon of the artwork. But I'm sure that in this audience there are loads of other ideas about how we might do things better. And if we start sharing these ideas and having conversations such as this and making steps, then yeah, I think this could be a really good way forward.
I mean, I kind of also think that an art fair is a place that does gather a lot of people that have a lot of, whether it's like a lot of different kinds of power. And I think that power can also be very productively sort of, if this is a platform where we can say if you have any access to any politician or any access to some kind of disposable income that you can, environmental philanthropy is only about 5%, is that right?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, it's right. It's very
of philanthropy in general. So it's also a good place for people who can influence other people to be in this room. So if you are in this room, thanks. We need you desperately.
And I would say there is still lots you can do materially on the environmental impacts of a festival, and it's the key is probably working with your concessions and your suppliers and contractors that help make the event work. So whether it's the recycling contract, if it's a regular venue that you're coming back each year, like Art Basel, you have an opportunity because you're an important client to the city, to the people that you're using the facilities of, and to develop partnership agreements with them. And we always say the first year is to ask them, and you kind of build up. So the first year is actually to say, we're really keen and we're working on this. We have an environmental policy. I would really like to know more about your environmental policy. The second year is to put it into the contract that you would expect them to do this. And it's always good as a starting point to work with your existing suppliers, give them a chance to step up. And then the third year, if they're still not playing ball, you say, we've given you a chance, but now we're going to have to look for an alternative. And now with the kind of green economy, lots of great alternatives are coming to play. And I often find with these subcontractors and suppliers, they'd never even realized that their client might be interested. So they might be doing some R&D, some really cool materials, and they're just getting on with it. And they often would love an opportunity to platform showcase what they're doing, to know that their client would actually, that would give them a little bit of competitive advantage. So I think, as Andrew said, it's like asking those key questions and collaborating.
And I suppose, just to go back to that philanthropy question, so there is the support, direct support of environmental causes. I think that is fundamental at the basis. There's also an enormous amount of patronage and support for art institutions. That patronage and then support can also go, if institutions structure something like, say, the general ecology, like a project that dedicates itself to ecology at all its levels, then there's also ways in which patronage and support for art institutions or any other institutions can be geared towards those very projects, because you are actually greening something if you're greening an art institution, even if you're not directly, anyway.
And well, the quick one I want to say that's been really interesting is oftentimes like trusts and foundations, they might do like loads of great, the same foundation might be doing loads of great support of the arts and loads of great support of the environment. And it may be that their two departments aren't even talking. And we've been doing some interesting work with philanthropists in the UK and actually a little bit in the US as well to help that the relationship between art and environment see as more mutually connected than sometimes the patrons or philanthropists even are cognizant of.
Right, and with that, I think it is time that we open it up to the floor for some question and answer. Are you ready for that? Yeah? Oh, Annalie has a microphone circulating.
Hello, my name is Alice Audouin, founder and chair of Art of Change 21. We are like cousins of Julie's Bicycle. We know each other very well. We work for several years with artists like John Gerard, like Olafur Eliasson, with the patron of the association. And we are very glad to be here because Art Basel gave us the authorization to do an art performance about climate change, which takes place every day at 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. right here in front of the entrance of Hall 1. And we are very glad to contribute to the topics we share today. And here are the young performers, artists, and members of Art of Change 21. Can say hi to everyone. And so please come to see them 2 p.m., 4 p.m. every day. And the name of the art performance is Climate Being. And it says, I mean, it says all, because we all depend on climate to be alive. Just two little things. When I was interviewed many times about the impact of Olafur Eliasson Ice Watch, and it's like if there are plenty of obese people, like they don't know how much they weigh, and the first one who says, hey, I'm 40 tons of CO2, everyone says, oh, it's a lot. And it was so unfair, you know, and I really took position to say, hey, he's the first one to measure, he's the first one to give the result, and guys, it's not that much. Do you know what is the carbon impact of an exhibition? So I really took position, not only because he's the patron of Art of Change 21, but because I think it's very important to measure and to publish the figures. And the other thing is about contemporary art. When you finish saying, like, what is the link between environment and contemporary art? Now we have to talk about the content, about the maybe message of the artwork. What is it to be a contemporary artist? It's to be on board with its times. And, you know, our times are facing climate change. It's not about dealing with a political or radical approach, but just belonging to your epoch. And today, our epoch is facing that. So it's really the question of what is a contemporary artist, in which period of time is he living, and is he talking about it or not? It's not about to be radical. It's to be, you know, fully part of our times. And I think that we should stop with ideology, political, radical approach of, oh, they deal with green things. It's really something like normal.
Does anybody have anything to comment on that comment?
No, but I couldn't agree more. About the question that climate change is not a radical political issue, I hope that we all agree in this room.
Sorry, we have a question over here first. Oh, if that's okay, yeah. I'm really curious about the impact, the difference in impact on climate change of alternate forms of transportation, particularly getting to places like Art Basel, Venice, et cetera, for art fairs, including what if we all took ships to get here? I don't know what the difference is. I do know that planes use an incredible amount of carbon. So therefore, I'm curious about the alternate forms of transportation. Not only, first of all, ships to get here. That's one. Okay, and the other one is when I go to New York City and I go to the galleries, I walk. It's a lot more interesting. I get my exercise, and I think I use a lot less carbon. At any rate, and it's 30 or 40 blocks or something like that, but I'm polluting a lot less. Your comments on literally the statistical difference, if you know it, and how that impacts.
And also the train, because I took the train from London to come here, and it took me 3 days, so I want to know that it was worth it.
Yeah, I mean, here in Europe, I took the train and have the Julie's Bicycle team. This is another thing that you can do as a company. So we get invited a lot to participate in all sorts of events, and try to have a policy that we will always only within Europe take a train. And I'm going to probably get it wrong, but the train is significantly less than taking a short haul flight. And in fact, a short haul flight is actually less efficient than a long haul flight, because a short haul flight, most of the energy is getting that plane off the ground. And so that's where you're really burning the most inefficient. And I think in aviation, there's sort of talks about new fuels and everything, but that's still far off. And a plane can, once you've built it, can be like a power station, like 40, 50 years running. So it is, it's thinking that the plane stock that we have today is still going to be out running around in 2050. So it's kind of, we've got all these kind of locked assets. The other thing which I think is so important is the trains need, to make them efficient, you need critical mass using them. Obviously, if you're the only person in the train, that's suddenly not become that efficient to move that huge vehicle around. And boats are more efficient. There's loads of great, interesting work going on in shipping. There's still diesel things, but again, there could be all sorts of innovations. It just takes time. So I think we have to kind of mentally move into a slow travel mode.
So when we were making the Rockbox and going through testing and design, we were determined to actually truly make a green product and make it out of as many recyclable materials as possible. And we commissioned a Lifecycle Analysis of artworld shipping stuff, because it's quite interesting to know where the devil is. And so we mapped out what the carbon footprint of a Rockbox and a wooden box, and then we looked at, okay, where they travel. So we did some common journeys like London, Geneva, and New York, London. And we were kind of surprised ourselves in the results. And the truth of it is, once you discount the carbon from creating the package for the thing to travel in, for New York to London, 82% of the carbon footprint is the air travel, flying through the air. And as the scientist said to us, he turned around and said, there's nothing very, efficient about taking a 5-kilo painting and putting it in a 50-kilo box. Like that's going to use a lot of fuel. And he also said that, you guys should be moving stuff by sea. Boats, because so I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's about 100 times better for the environment. But I don't know if there are many boats going London to New York that you want to sit on. Sorry.
But there could be.
There should be. There should be.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Johanna Zuleta, and I'm a cross-pollinator. also working between politics, the corporate world, and arts and culture. So happy to help you later as I work with policymakers, among others, producing the G20 report. But and I wanted to answer something regarding the earlier question, because one of the initiatives that I'm creating, it's precisely we need much more cooperation between industries. For instance, I am coordinating forums where we can restructure the economy too, and that also plays along with this. For instance, one of those forum groups that I'm involved with, they are creating a cryptocurrency that protects mangroves. So it's going to be launched with the UN and other initiatives here in Switzerland later this month, and people will be encouraged to take the train and earn points from it rather than using their car. And you can convert those points later in the supermarket or investing in cryptocurrencies, protecting mangroves or all the forms of nature. So that was like a practical way in which it all interrelates. But my question to you specifically is regarding all the knowledge that you have gathered and absorbed and all these reach that you have with audiences. Because what I feel as well that we are lacking in the next step is how to empower all these citizens that are here or that are watching you worldwide right now. So do you also move a step forward into providing roadmaps or an A to Z of what each citizen can do with the synthesis of each of your knowledges? Thank you.
Can I just check, was it a question for anyone specific? For all of us.
So it's interesting. We just did. So one of the programs that we have at Julie's Bicycle is called Creative Green. So one part of that is a certification where we certify arts organizations, festivals, tours, etc. We did 60 certs this last year. But part of that we do some kind of sort of more deep dive training, and I did a session at Blenheim Palace last week. And it's interesting, Blenheim Palace has 10 goals that they want to achieve by 2027. And one of those goals is to be a next generator of renewables, to be a great place to work, and that you can go and see them. But they are doing some really interesting work at telling the story, and they're looking at their history. They've been a palace for 300 years, and they're thinking, we want to be here still in 300 years' time, and looking at how they thread that through across all their journey. So your experience as a visitor into Blenheim Palace is kind of part of that. They source as many goods as they can, for example, within a 20-mile radius, and so they're supporting this local economy. So they're kind of threading it through everything they do, and we did a whole session in the afternoon looking at how you might communicate it, and really, again, it's about the language you use, the way you draw it in, the way you pull in your artist community. I think that the hard thing is, as I said, yes, it'd be great if contemporary artists were all working on climate change, but I think with Julie's Bicycle would always say the artist has to go through their own direction. We can't prescribe artists. You want a kind of mixture and people kind of drawing on these themes. But yeah, and the festival work we do, one of our festivals, they probably have an audience of 3 million a year, and they do incredible kind of work in messaging through that experience of coming to the festival. But it's not easy. It's not, and they still, like, Reading Festival still has 20,000 tents left at the end of a weekend, and yeah, it's a little bit of a battle.
I have a burning feeling in answer to that question, so I'm going to try and make it very brief, I promise. It may very well happen that within the next 6 months, that in the past 6 months or in the next 6 months, we get to a point where we all collectively realize that no matter the target, many things it's too late for. Millions of species and so on and so forth. It may be that we get to the point. I'm a firm believer in the kind of Donna Haraway position of don't believe that just because something you didn't work, that it didn't work. I'm done with thinking about the catch-all solution that is going to single-handedly solve all the problems. I don't think that any of us are should at least be in the position of thinking that there is such a thing, which means that what the next step is actually an individual's questions that we ask ourselves in the living of our daily lives and in the way in which we try and connect people, initiatives, ideas, communities, moments of conviviality, all of those things that we do together with each other and as, you know, with the kind of the right set of images or ideas in mind are it. And I mean, maybe I haven't personally got any ambition or any hope to invent the water-powered plane. But if someone does, that's amazing. But it's like, I think we all need to come to the reckoning with the fact that it is in actual every moment of the day that next step tends to take place.
Right. Well, with that, I'd like to thank our panelists today. It is a hopeful moment to end on. I feel like it is a hopeful-ish moment. Yeah. I'd like to thank you all for sharing your expertise today, and thank you to our organizers for having us for this conversation. The organizers of conversations, thank you, and thank you to the audience for engaging with us in an unpleasant conversation in the midst of a very pleasant situation. So thank you.
Thank you.